All right, we are rolling here. Okay, don't you forget about me. The Breakfast Club, yeah. So this video is where I'm going to give you my take on The Breakfast Club, the movie, and show you what I think about it, or tell you about what I think about it, and whatnot. So this is just kind of an introduction to The Breakfast Club. You guys will say a lot about it. It's a movie that we'll be watching this semester, without question. Okay, so The Breakfast Club is a movie from the 80s. It's been a long time. I think it came out in 1985 roughly. And so it's been at least 35 years ago. Um, probably more, that it was been out, and it's aged like everything else. Just to be right off the bat, you will hear some stuff in there. It's a rated R movie. There is swearing in it. There is drug use. I don't know that the movie itself is sexist, but it definitely has some sexist elements, in the sense that at least the things that the characters say are sexist, and it reveals or reflects sexist elements of our society. So that's right off the bat. There's also homophobia in the film, cultural insensitivity as well. All those things are in this movie, which is a comedy, but at the same time, those elements are there for you. You can see. So I just want to say that right off the bat. You'll see swearing, you'll see homophobia, you'll see sexism in there. It's not the only thing that's in there, but it's an element of it. So let's not deny it. There's drug use, and so that's all in there in the mix. It's a rated R film, and it's 35 years old. So that's the disclaimer, sort of, I guess. The reason we're watching the movie is because we're looking at the group dynamics that we're studying this semester, and this movie sort of shows them, because it's about a group of students that are stuck in detention in high school in Chicago in the 80s. And not surprisingly, you see group dynamics happen where they're sort of stuck there with each other. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just kind of go through some of the characters here and kind of go over them and share some of my thoughts on them. You'll be writing about this in your forums and on your midterm and whatnot. So you'll see all that sort of come together throughout the class. But this is like kind of a basic introduction to the characters and my thoughts on them. So let's start with John. John is played by Judd Nelson. Some people call him the stoner character. Like, that was the term we would use for a person like this when I was in high school, that would dress like this. Actually, this is all pre Kurt Cobain, so the flannel and all that. If you look at the way Kurt Cobain from Nirvana dressed, it was kind of like this. Although he's from Seattle and this guy's from Chicago, and this is before that. So before the grunge movement, I guess you could say. Anyway, they refer to him as the stoner. I think his first name's John. He's definitely a character that you cannot ignore. Going back to our earlier discussion about sexism, he's the most sexist character for sure. He has a little homophobia in there, a little cultural insensitivity, but definitely sexism, sort of male privilege, and he's sort of sexist and even sexually harasses people sort of a little bit. So anyway, just that's the thing about him for sure. And in terms of this character's background, he comes from kind of a rough background, kind of an abusive parent. Oh, this contains spoilers, so I would suggest watching the movie before you listen to this video, I should mention. So anyway, he's a pretty intense character, for sure. And or you can listen to this if you haven't watched the movie yet, actually, if you want to. But anyway, he's pretty intense. He comes from a kind of a rough background, kind of an abusive background. He smokes cigarettes, and at one point they mentioned that his dad gave him cigarettes for his Christmas and stuff like that. In terms of roles, I mean, when people first see him, the first thing they think of is Joker. Like, he seems like a Joker. He's always joking around. He lights his boot on fire. He threatens to urinate in public. All sorts of things that he does that are sort of, you know, Joker-esque in his behavior. And certainly that is a big part of him. But he's also an incredible information seeker, like constantly asking people for information about themselves as well. So you see that. He's also, you know, he's definitely somebody who is a self-confessor, although in a good way to a certain extent, because of their goal to find out who they are. You know, the teacher gives them the task of figuring out who they are. That's the task at hand, I suppose. It's one of the tasks anyway. And he definitely does that very nicely, and that is to reveal his, you know, family abuse and family situation as well. So he's an information seeker. He's definitely a self-confessor. Excuse me. He's also a person that is constantly saying his opinion about things. Like, he has all sorts of judgments about other people. Like, if they're in the wrestling team, he has judgments about that. He has judgments about academic clubs to a certain extent. Although sometimes he's not so much judgments himself, he's claiming other people have judgments and he doesn't, but you can kind of tell he has judgments as well. Yeah, so he's, in a weird way, it's interesting because on the one hand, he seems like he's the biggest joker, but if the teacher gave them the job of figuring out who they are, he's the one who kind of moves the group towards asking that question about themselves as well. So that's not to take away from the bad things that he does, but he does do that as well. His conflict style, if I was to look at his conflict style, it's competitive. Like, he usually doesn't look at collaborating with other people when it comes to conflicts or harmonizing in any way. If he sees a conflict, he'll go for it, and he's the kind of person who would, you know, if there's one fight, he would escalate it till the whole house is burned down type thing. He loves to escalate conflicts throughout. You know, if someone says even something that attacks him mildly, he goes off, you know, and he will resort to threats of violence, even has a pocket knife or a switchblade at one point. So super interesting character. The ending with him is super controversial. Yeah, John. All right, let's move on. Okay, so this is the vice principal of the school. Dick Vernon is his name, Vice Principal Dick Vernon. And he is definitely quite the character as well. He's an aggressor, I guess would be the role I would take on or would mention for him. He's just very aggressive. He seems to be very frustrated about certain aspects of his life, and he is going to take it out on other people. So he's quite aggressive, and basically all the frustrations he has, he's taking them out on other people. He does not take the higher ground. His conflict style is definitely competitive, like John's, and they've actually met their match because you can see their conflict sort of escalating, you know, to the point where they're going to spend every weekend together in detention. So that's his primary role, is aggression. And yeah, Dick Vernon, he looks like he's been working at the school for quite a while, and he's pretty bitter about the kids. And he does not ever look for common ground. Like, there's so many times when he could have taken John aside in a peaceful way and said, hey, you know, you and I, we are stuck here together for detention. Let's make the best of it. I won't bug you if you don't bug me, or let's come to some kind of a compromise. But instead, he takes him aside and threatens him with violence. And, you know, there's all kinds of stuff. Like, he just tries to humiliate everybody in front of, and in fact, at first, he looks like he might be able to control the group, but then he insults everybody. Like, he burns his bridge with every student instead of, like, sort of uniting everybody against John, because John was initially bullying everybody. He doesn't do that. So that's another thing about him. Okay, let's move on from Dick Vernon for now. This character's named Claire. The actress that plays him is actually Molly Ringwald. And if you ever watch Riverdale, which is a television program that sort of combines the Archie comics with an old David Lynch TV show called Twin Peaks, she plays Archie's mom. So, because she's like a redhead, and Archie's like famously a redhead. So there she is. Yeah, so this character, Some people call her the prom queen, or they call her sometimes the princess or whatever. She's interesting as well. Like all the characters are interesting, I guess, but she really caught my interest as well. Her parents are fighting a lot, so she brings that to the table. So she's kind of a self-confessor in that sense. She's actually quite the follower, like whether it be the principal who's kind of vice principal who's rising as the leader, which is kind of the case at the beginning, or when he kind of burns his bridge with everybody and then John becomes the leader, she kind of goes along. Like there's a point where he could have gotten in trouble, John, and she like helps him hide and avoid getting caught. So she's kind of a follower, I guess you could call her at some point. She also is a big information giver. She gives people information about what it's like to be popular, because she's a popular kid at the school, and they're kind of curious about what it takes to be popular, or what's that lifestyle like. And yeah, so she does that. She's quite the character as well for that, and she gives information about what it's like to be popular. She also shares her opinion about like what popularity means to be. So she's an opinion giver as well. At points, she's a harmonizer. Like she just tries to. It doesn't really get much success for it, but she encourages John to not get himself in more trouble. She's also the recipient of John's sexism most of the time. Like I mentioned earlier, that John is very sexist. The stoner, he is sexist, but he's especially sexist towards her. So there's that as well. Yeah, so those are some things that she does. She is a self-confessor, like I'm talking about her parents' problems, but I would say in a good way, actually, which is that if they're trying to figure out who they are, that figuring out their problems with their parents is probably important. A lot of times talking about your personal problems with a group can be an issue sometimes if it's a task group and they're trying to get a project done. But in this case, the project is to figure out who they are, so it kind of works for her. Okay, this character's name is Brian. He's played by Anthony Michael Hall. And he has a cop show on cable. I forgot what it's called right now. But anyway, he's Brian. He's also been on Riverdale and things like that. And I think Riverdale. But he's definitely been on, it's interesting. He was actually on the show The Community, if you ever watched that one. And he plays the bully, ironically. But in this one, actually, though, this movie, The Breakfast Club, he's considered the nerd or the geek or the brain. He definitely serves as the recorder in the group, recording, keeping track of, for example, how many times John is going to go to detention for being naughty or bad. He's pretty cool at doing that. He's good at doing that. I wouldn't say he's very cool. Like he's nerd is the point. He's also a harmonizer. Like he tries to bring peace between the jock and the stoner, or between Andy and John. He tries to bring about peace and say common ground, like, hey, we all, have issues with our parents, and try to bring everybody together. He is not always successful, but he definitely tries, and I think it helps a little bit to a certain extent. But yeah, recorder's the big thing. And of course, he helps write the paper, is a big player in the paper at the end there. So he's recording what the group has said the whole time. So he's obviously a big recorder. And then like he's an information giver, just giving what information he knows about like what the different clubs are like academic clubs. Like most of the people in this group don't participate in those, and he is part of academic clubs. So there's that. And he wants to get straight A's. Whether or not that's realistic or not, he tries to get good grades and whatnot. So yeah, so that's Brian, played by Anthony Michael Hall. Okay, this is Andy. Andy is played by Emilio Estevez. And Emilio Estevez is the brother of Charlie Sheen, just a kind of a side note there. He's the jock or athlete. What I like the portrayal of this, actually, because the athletes in a lot of movies are shown as always being the total bullies and having no other sides to them. He does have a bully aspect to him, but they actually show other sides to him as an athlete. So it's a little bit more of a fair portrayal, perhaps, of athletes. But he's on the wrestling team, and he's an athlete. His main role to me is that of the standard setter, not so much in terms of the quality of their paper, the product, but the standards by which they treat each other. He's the one who notices that John is bullying Claire and being extremely sexist, and he doesn't use that word sexist, but the implication is there. Yeah, so he does say some homophobic things in the film, so there's that. At the time, people used to throw those types of insults around a little bit more. I'm not excusing it, but you definitely see some homophobia coming from him. But yeah, standard setter is the main thing. But he also information giver. He gives the information to the group about what it's like to be under all that pressure as an athlete and have all that pressure upon you. It's a pretty big amount of pressure to be, constantly achieving in the athletic field and be working towards scholarships and everything like that. So he's that. His conflict style is, there's a point, he goes competitive, but you can see him like where he realizes it's not worth it and he goes for avoidance as well. So there's a point where he escalates with John, but unlike the principal who will take it to the ultimate, like he would be willing to like fight him in the street there. There's a point where he backs off to a certain extent, but mostly he's pretty competitive a lot of times. He tries to be collaborative at times with John. There are points. It doesn't always happen, but yeah. Emilio Estevez as Andy. Okay, and then this character is named Allison. And Allison is, some people call her the basket case. I never used that term for her. I don't really consider her a basket case. But anyway, it's what the filmmakers call. Some people call her the goth character because she does wear black a lot and whatnot. Although if you look at what album she's carrying, it's a Prince album, and the goths usually didn't listen to Prince. It was more like they listened to Bauhaus and Ministry and things like that. But anyway, some people call her the goth. Ali Sheedy plays this character of Allison, and her parents ignore her. That's the big thing. The parents, some parents are giving the kids too much attention and pressuring them to get good grades, and then the other ones are ignoring them. She's one of the ones that gets ignored for sure. And I actually consider her a joker now. I know she's not joking around at all, but she's disengaged from the group's process for about half the film. She refuses to talk, even though she can talk, which I consider to be kind of a joker thing to do. Now, I know that's not a classic joker thing, because like when we think about a joker, we think about someone who's joking around all the time. But she doesn't do that, but she does disengage from the group. If this was the modern day, I would say she'd be on her phone all the time, like searching through Instagram or whatever, ignoring the group, because she's just constantly refusing to talk for first half. And then the second half, she talks a lot. But I mean, some of the things she does are kind of jokerish as well. At that point, later she becomes like an information giver, giving information about like what is her problems, her personal problems that have led her to this spot. Also, she's an opinion giver. She gives her opinion about their generation and what is going to happen with their generation. So it's kind of interesting as well. Her conflict style is avoidance for like half the movie, at least. She avoids by just not talking. And then later she seems to avoid by creating all these red herrings or distractions. So avoidance is her big conflict style. If I was to try to say what her conflict style is, based on the conflict styles that are mentioned by Benny and Sheets. So yeah. And her name is Allison. So we'll see that. And you can really see the effects of parental neglect in this one. Brian is probably getting too much attention from his parents, but it's very negative in terms of, achieve in school. And then Andy's getting too much attention from his parents in terms of pressuring him to be successful in sports. This is an example of a kid who has gotten ignored. Okay, this is Carl, the janitor. So the janitor isn't in the movie very much, and he's not necessarily, I guess he's part of the group for a little bit, not really, but he is a character in there. He's definitely a recorder. He's going through all the notes in their lockers and recording, trying to get his own idea of what makes high school students tick. I don't know if he's writing a paper about it or not, or going to maybe write a book about the behavior of high school students, but he's interested in it. He went to the high school himself and was voted most likely to succeed. If you look at the opening sequence, you can see a picture of him there. But of course, he's a janitor now. I guess he's successful as a janitor. Yeah, there's a lot. He also gives them a lot of information, like that the clock is moving fast, and He gives his opinion about high school students that's very different from the principal, and there's a nice back and forth there where the principal's blaming the kids on everything, and then he says, what's your role in it? So that's good as well. So Carl's the character's name, and he's the janitor for the school. Not in the movie a lot, but he is in the film. Screech is not in the movie, for those of you who liked Saved by the Bell. Neither is Cotter from Welcome Back, Cotter. But this picture I did want to show you. This is kind of a backstage. As you can see, this is a backstage in the dressing room photo. Here you see John, Claire, Andy, Allison, Brian. This gentleman here is John Hughes. John Hughes made the movie, The Breakfast Club. He wrote it and he directed it. He also made movies like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He wrote the screenplay for Home Alone. He wrote Uncle Buck, and he wrote Some Kind of Wonderful. He wrote Pretty in Pink. He didn't direct it, but he wrote Pretty in Pink, if you ever saw that movie. So a lot of the movies, the old movies, he wrote the original Vacation script with Chevy Chase. So a lot of old 80s movies, he wrote them. If you look at his films, they're kind of the through line is he's kind of against ageism towards young people. Like teenagers, especially at the time, used to get attacked a lot and were not respected. He really encouraged folks to kind of look at teenage people as people with flaws, but they also were people and should be respected and whatnot. So he actually provides that quote at the beginning from David Bowie, who's famously bisexual, actually, kind of as a side note, considering all the homophobic characters we see in here. It talks about how, young people are people and they know what they're going through to a certain extent. We spit upon them, but we should respect them, actually. So he really advocates for that in all his movies, and The Breakfast Club isn't any exception. The Breakfast Club actually in some ways was a group project. He wrote the screenplay, it's true, but then he had the actors over to his house who were teenagers at the time, most of them anyway, and asked them to rewrite the script so they would sound the way teenagers talk, and he asked them to tweak the plot a little bit to make it more realistic. Not realistic, it's kind of a not very realistic movie, but to make it more like, the overall plot, I suppose, isn't very realistic, but little bits of it do ring true for people in the 80s and even today to a certain extent. So yeah, he really did as a group project to a certain extent. The screenplay for the movie was kind of a group project because he had them over at his house a bunch to really work on the script with him. Once he'd written the script, but he had them tweak it with him and work on it. So that's John Hughes. It's kind of like a member of the group. Yeah, he's not with us anymore. He actually passed away. All the other actors are alive still, but he passed away. He was a smoker, so he kind of died young. But he was a great guy. And he really loved kids so much that at one point after he retired from film making to just spend time with his kids. And he did get to do that before he passed away. So that was good. So we should definitely look at that him as, even though he's not there in the movie, he's kind of like a character. Actually, he is in there in the movie. Oops, sorry. He is actually in the movie for a bit. He picks up, I think, Brian as his dad. So it's like he doesn't have a speaking part, but he picks him up at the end of the thing. Okay, here's all the characters. Just kind of a side note, back in the 80s at the time, no one had ever done this before for a film cover about teenagers, so having them all stare at the camera. Before that, they would always show like action sequences. It would be a picture of an action sequence from the movie. It would be on the film, on the cover. This idea of them all staring at us and not smiling. And having teenagers not smile and look at the camera like that. That was pretty unheard of at the time. There was usually movies had like an action sequence of some kind, a still shot of an action sequence of this type of teen comedy. So this one where they're all staring at us and not smiling and just everything about it, it's pretty iconic because not too many films had that kind of a cover for a mainstream film anyway. And this week it was the movie poster. So yeah, at the time it was a big deal. Now lots of movies have that. And by the way, this movie is before like Heathers or Mean Girls or Jawbreaker. A lot of the films that kind of touched on the whole Mean Girl phenomenon, which definitely Claire like talks about that. I don't know if you consider her a mean girl, but she talks about that. I mentioned earlier that there's drug use in the movie, and There is, which was super controversial at the time, and kind of still is. Like teenagers using drugs. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about people this young using drugs. It's particularly marijuana, but I'm not sure if that's the right. I have some concerns, I guess I could say. But anyway, check my beliefs at the door and keep that out of it. But yeah, there's they do have some marijuana smoking in here in this movie, and that does affect the group dynamic to a certain extent. So that's pretty undeniable. My concern is that they become overly dependent on the drugs to be able to reach that level of disclosure. I'm not like a super conservative anti-drug person, but I don't know. This young, yeah. Anyway, that's what happens in the film, so it's probably pretty realistic, I guess. Probably not at school though. Yeah, so that's the end of the PowerPoint. And there we are. So The Breakfast Club, yeah, cool movie in some ways, kind of antiquated in others. You get to write about it throughout the class. It's a fun analysis piece. I hope you enjoy that as you're going through it. You can watch it and view it. And of course, this is just like my take on it. So you get to share your opinion about the film too. I'm just kind of throwing out my thoughts on the movie, The Breakfast Club. I saw it, just like my background was that I saw this film opening night, actually, at the drive-in. And one of my friends had just gotten a driver's license, and she drove us there, and we watched it, and we absolutely loved it. And one of the things that helped me about this film is, flaws and all, it helped me realize that like high school, like a lot of the pecking order and the cliques and the snobbery and all that, and you're not cool if you're not part of this group and all that, is just a construct that we have created. And it, I don't know, helped me survive high school. I don't know, and life actually, just sort of knowing that a lot of these things are just constructed. They're not real. Whoever is supposedly cool is cool for the moment because they've happened to find themselves in that situation and they've constructed that. But you know, and that sometimes when people are snobs, they don't really want to be snobs. They're just kind of in a habit. I'm not excusing snobbery, but you know, just if you're not in the part of the in group, just know that probably if you were in the in group, you would have a different set of problems, I guess. And there's nothing wrong with not being cool or not being part of the in group. And if you're in the in crowd, and we just, you know, hats off to you, because there's a lot of pressure there as well. So that's kind of, I kind of got out of it. And then just the other thing I got was that just as a group, like talking about your problems makes you feel better, even though it doesn't actually solve the problems. Just talking about them can help you get to solutions, and it can make you feel better. So just using groups as a therapy session, if it's appropriate. In this case, it is, because the teacher assigns them to figure out who they are. So, you know, and it's just because they have time to do it, and they do. At the surface, it just seems like some kids in detention, but the teacher sort of weirdly giving them the assignment of figuring out who they are, and then them actually weirdly doing it, even though they didn't plan to. They didn't like say, oh, the teacher made us do this, so we're going to figure it out. They end up just sort of accidentally, I guess, figuring out who they are, and then writing a good paper about it, an okay paper about it, I suppose. Yeah, it's a kind of interesting dynamic that where on the surface, the stoner seems like he's like totally working against what the teacher wants. In a lot of ways he is. But if the teacher's assignment is for them to figure out who they are, he's really instrumental in that. Cool. So all the characters are instrumental and great. As I mentioned earlier, just as a disclaimer, the film has a lot of sexism and homophobia and even some cultural insensitivity in it. I don't know that the film itself is offensive, but some of the things that people say is offensive. So just putting it out there, like, it's not good what they do, you know, but that is what exists in our society, and it's kind of realistic on that level. So yeah, so I hope you enjoy the movie. Some of my students, it's like, have told me that it's their favorite movie, or it's their parents' favorite movie, or it's their favorite movie that they can also relate to with their parents. So there's that. And some people don't like the movie. It's okay not to like it too. We can still learn from movies we don't like. So if you don't like it, that's okay too. Yeah, so enjoy The Breakfast Club. And if you have any questions, just let me know. And there'll be some assignments related to it as well. And you can just check it out and enjoy it for what it is. It helps us to see how conflicts are handled, how roles are handled, at some point decision-making even, and lots of other elements. Disclosure, like the way that people slowly disclose to each other over time. All those topics can be studied with it. So this is a good intro, and then you guys can go crazy with it as well and enjoy, and say your opinion about it. That's just my opinion. So I'd love to hear your opinion. All right, the breakfast club. Yeah, and email me if you guys have any questions. I'm always happy to hear what you guys have to say or what questions you have. Thanks.